Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in sophomore English, and we turn now in your hymnals to page 7677, the great Maya Angelou and occupation Conductorette. Now, we want to start with just a brief introduction to Maya Angelou, but before we get there, jump to 2b really quickly. And just like the Lynn Cox text that we worked with, we now will say about this text two things. This is a work of autobiography, write that down in 2b. In other words, an individual telling about his or her life, in this case, Maya Angelou's life. Okay? Number two, our technical perspective here is the author's perspective. In other words, what kinds of information is shared and how is that information shared? And how does the sharing of that information relate in some way to your own existence, to your own life? For example, in the Lynn Cox text, Swimming to Antarctica, the challenge is this question. When I am met with a very, very difficult challenge in my life, how do I get through? Two observations from that reading. Self-talk. I can either tell myself, this is impossible, you can't do it, or keep going, keep going, keep going, keep swimming, as the text suggests, right? Number two, the only way you get through adversity is with the help of others. You never are alone. You've always got other people pulling for you, supporting you. Sometimes, of course, like in the case of Lynn Cox, they're in the boat. They're cheering you on from the sidelines. What would it be like to think about school as the place where the adults are cheering you on? I realize that's counterintuitive to the way some students think about the adults who are teachers. But if you could catch for a moment the glimpse that there are adults who are supporting you, they're going to challenge you, but they want you to, in the end, succeed. We're going to see something similar now with Maya Angelou. Born in 1928, died the 28th of May, 2014. Very, very influential writer in American thought. Let's read a little about her. Angelou was born Marquette Johnson in St. Louis, Missouri. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Let's write that title down. It's huge. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. The work from which this selection comes is the first part of her autobiography. Up from hard times. Some of the communities in which Angelou grew up were segregated. Let's write that word in our notes. Segregated. African Americans excluded from facilities, including schools used by whites. Yet, Angelou rejects bitterness, saying, the honorary duty of a human being is to love. What an amazing line. You might write that line down. The honorary duty of a human being is to love. Angelou has had diverse experiences in life. She worked with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the Civil Rights Movement. Afterwards, she moved to Africa, where she lived from 61 to 66. Her literary success came in the 1970s, and she, of course, was accorded the great status of one of America's greatest writers by the time she passed. Did you know Angelou read one of her poems at President William Jefferson Clinton's inauguration in 1993? Now, let's get a little bit of occupation Conductorette background information for this autobiography on page 77. Jobs in World War II. During the 1940s, the time Maya Angelou recalls, millions of American men went overseas to fight World War II. Their absence created new opportunities at home. 6 million women went to work in industry to aid the war effort, taking jobs newly open to them. Although African Americans still face prejudice, some found or made new opportunities for themselves. We're going to hear about that in this reading. By the way, on page 78, read this. The young Angelou has just returned to San Francisco after an adventure-filled trip. Things are changing at home. She discovers, and her brother moves out. And soon after her return, restless and discontent, Angelou ponders her next step. What is it that she is going to do? Let's now pay attention to the ways in which, two things for your notes at level 1. Angelou recognizes a problem. Write that down. Recognizes a problem. What is that problem? Write that down at level 1. So she recognizes, I got a serious problem on my hands. Number 2, Angelou responds to the problem. How does she respond to the problem? Let's pay attention to both of those questions now as we conquer monkey mind, and let's go to work with this text now.
Occupation Conductorette, from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings by Maya Angelou. A young Angelou has just returned to San Francisco after an adventure-filled trip. Things are changing at home, she discovers, and her brother moves out soon after her return. Restless, discontent, Angelou ponders her next step.
Page 79.
I had it. The answer came to me with the suddenness of a collision. I would go to work. Mother wouldn't be difficult to convince. After all, in school I was a year ahead of my grade, and Mother was a firm believer in self-sufficiency. In fact, she'd be pleased to think that I had that much gumption, that much of her in my character. She liked to speak of herself as the original do-it-yourself girl.
Page 80.
Once I had settled on getting a job, all that remained was to decide which kind of job I was most fitted for. My intellectual pride had kept me from selecting typing, shorthand, or filing as subjects in school, so office work was ruled out. War plants and shipyards demanded birth certificates, and mine would reveal me to be 15 and ineligible for work. So the well-paying defense jobs were also out. Women had replaced men on the streetcars as conductors and motormen, and the thought of sailing up and down the hills of San Francisco in a dark blue uniform with a money changer at my belt caught my fancy. Mother was as easy as I had anticipated. The world was moving so fast, so much money was being made, so many people were dying in Guam and Germany that hordes of strangers became good friends overnight. Life was cheap and death entirely free. How could she have the time to think about my academic career? To her question of what I planned to do, I replied that I would get a job on the streetcars. She rejected the proposal with, "They don't accept colored people on the streetcars." I would like to claim an immediate fury which was followed by the noble determination to break the restricting tradition. But the truth is, my first reaction was one of disappointment. I'd pictured myself dressed in a neat blue serge suit, my money changer swinging jauntily at my waist, and a cheery smile for the passengers, which would make their own workday brighter. From disappointment, I gradually ascended the emotional ladder to haughty indignation, and finally to that state of stubbornness where the mind is locked like the jaws of an enraged bulldog.
All right, now this is a classic type line from I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. So let's take a look at it. The line that you just read. We're going to go back and look at it again. The brilliance of the simple language and yet the powerful message that's being portrayed here. By the way, put it at 3A. I've already mentioned earlier Booker T. Washington's Up From Slavery, another autobiographic text which has a very similar kind of sentiment to it. The idea that when you meet with especially prejudice, you have to make a decision about how you're going to respond to that prejudice. Read the line again with me. The first thing her mother says when she says, "I'm going to be a conductorette," the mother says, "Yeah, they don't let black people do that job. That's a white person's job." She says, "I wish I could say that I was angry immediately." I wasn't. She says, "I was disappointed." But look at what she says next. From disappointment, I gradually ascended, going up, the emotional ladder to haughty indignation. Oh, no, you didn't. That's indignation. That's what indignation means. Haughty indignation. And finally, to that state of stubbornness, where the mind is locked like the jaws of an enraged bulldog. That is to say, you go from doubt, self-doubt we might say, let's put that in our notes, self-doubt, to a decision, you know what? I can do this. I will do this. Now notice how in both titles, I'm already making a 3A observation for your notes. Notice how in both titles, the Lynn Cox Swimming to Antarctica and this text, both of the women have to overcome a challenge. In the Lynn Cox text, it's a self-imposed challenge. Can I swim in water that I'm not supposed to be swimming in and most humans can't swim in? Can I go a mile in that water? That's a personal challenge. To do something no other human has ever done before and to say, I did that thing. In this text, it's a different understanding. It's a cultural bias that says, because of your skin color, or because of your gender, or because of any number of other things, challenges we meet. And the question is, how do you respond to that challenge? Do you give up and quit? Or do you decide, no, I will do something to change the status quo. I will make up my mind to overcome, in this case, for example, prejudice. Now, let's go ahead and put it in our notes at level 1. We said there were 2 things we were focused on. 1, what was the problem? Now you can obviously write that down. The young 15-year-old Angela is ready to go to work and get a job. Let's think about the power of that. Instead of sitting around waiting for somebody to help her, she decides to help herself. She wants a job, but she doesn't want a job like normal girls. So already we see this as a different understanding of Angela. She says, I don't want to just go be some typist or something like that. She says, man, I would love this job. Mom says, yeah, you can't have that job because of your skin color. She says, yeah, we'll see about that. So in other words, she recognizes the challenge. Now for the rest of the reading, we're going to find out, how does she get what she wanted? I'm going to guess, as you're going to guess, that it has something to do with overcoming some prejudices, and it has something to do with W-O-R-K, and a little bit of courage, or maybe a lot of courage to go along with it as well. That refusal to give up. Let's watch, and hey, this is why I argue to sophomores it's so important you learn how to read biographies and autobiographies. Because in our life, we are going to meet things. Hey, do you remember those lines from our freshman year when we studied Psalm of Life? Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. That is to say, we study the lives of other people. We see how they overcame great obstacles, and we say, you know what? If they could overcome obstacles like that, I can overcome the obstacles that are standing in my way. Let's take a look now at the way in which the young Angelou is able to rise up. Did you see that? Ascending, rise up, right? And go to work. Let's see how it works.
I would go to work on the streetcars and wear a blue serge suit. Mother gave me her support with one of her usual terse asides. That's what you want to do? Then nothing beats a trial but a failure. Give it everything you've got. I've told you many times, can't do is like don't care. Neither of them have a home. Translated, that meant there was nothing a person can't do, and there should be nothing a human being didn't care about. It was the most positive encouragement I could have hoped for.
Huge, right? Huge.
In the offices of the Market Street Railway Company, the receptionist seemed as surprised to see me there as I was surprised to find the interior dingy and the decor drab. Somehow, I had expected waxed surfaces and carpeted floors. If I had met no resistance, I might have decided against working for such a poor-mouth-looking concern. As it was, I explained that I had come to see about a job. She asked, was I sent by an agency, and when I replied that I was not, she told me they were only accepting applicants from agencies. The classified pages of the morning papers had listed advertisements for motorettes and conductorettes, and I reminded her of that. She gave me a face full of astonishment that my suspicious nature would not accept. I am applying for the job listed in this morning's Chronicle, and I'd like to be presented to your personnel manager. While I spoke in supercilious accents and looked at the room as if I had an oil well in my own backyard, my armpits were being pricked by millions of hot-pointed needles. She saw her escape and dived into it. He's out. He's out for the day. You might call tomorrow, and if he's in, I'm sure you can see him. Then she swiveled her chair around on its rusty screws, and with that I was supposed to be dismissed. May I ask his name? She half turned, acting surprised to find me still there. His name? Whose name? Your personnel manager. We were firmly joined in the hypocrisy to play out the scene. The personnel manager, oh, he's Mr. Cooper. But I'm not sure you'll find him here tomorrow. Oh, but you can try. Thank you. You're welcome. And I was out of the musty room and into the even mustier lobby. In the street, I saw the receptionist and myself going faithfully through paces that were stale with familiarity. although I had never encountered that kind of situation before, and probably neither had she. We were like actors who, knowing the play by heart, were still able to cry afresh over the old tragedies and laugh spontaneously at the comic situations. The miserable little encounter had nothing to do with me, the me of me,
Page
any more
82.
than it had to do with that silly clerk. The incident was a recurring dream, concocted years before by stupid whites, and it eternally came back to haunt us all. The secretary and I were like Hamlet and Laertes in the final scene, where, because of harm done by one ancestor to another, we were bound to duel to the death. Also because the play must end somewhere. I went further than forgiving the clerk. I accepted her as a fellow victim of the same puppeteer. On the streetcar, I put my fare into the box, and the conductorette looked at me with the usual hard eyes of white contempt. "Move into the car. Please move on in the car." She patted her money changer. Her southern nasal accent sliced my meditation, and I looked deep into my thoughts. All lies, all comfortable lies. The receptionist was not innocent, and neither was I. The whole charade we had played out in that crummy waiting room had directly to do with me, black, and her, white. I wouldn't move into the streetcar, but stood on the ledge over the conductor, glaring. My mind shouted so energetically that the announcement made my veins stand out and my mouth tighten into a prune. I would have the job. I would be a conductorette and sling a full money changer from my belt. I would. The next 3 weeks.
All right, let's pause for a moment, write it down at level 1. Let's say 2 things really quickly. 1, when she decides, Maya Angelou, that she's going to do this, I'm with you on page 80. Her mother, who is plays a very important role in I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Her mother is the one that will in fact speak directly to her and will say to her, do it. Notice the words on page 80 at the bottom of the page. I would go to work on the streetcars and wear a blue serge suit. Mother gave me her support with one of her usual terse asides. That's what you want to do? Then nothing beats a trial but failure. Give it everything you've got. I've told you many times, can't do is like don't care. I've had sophomores that write that line down. Put it next to their bed. Wake up every morning and take a look at it. Can't do is like don't care. The degree to which, of course, the mother is then playing a very influential role. We said this earlier, that often in the lives of great people, they say it out loud. It has to be taught to us. This notion of self-sufficiency. Hey, jot this down at 3A really quickly from your freshman year. You'll remember Carry Your Own Skis was a very influential essay that we studied in our freshman year about how a young woman was taught by in her youth, as a very young girl, that if you want to go skiing, which is a lot of fun, then you got to be able to carry your own skis. That is to say, symbolically, take care of yourself. That's what we mean by self-sufficiency. And so you've got a young Angelou who then says, you know what? I am going to go get this job. She walks into the job and immediately is met with an obstacle. Namely, of course, racism, prejudice. She's told, there's any number of reasons why you can't have the job. So-and-so is out. Come back tomorrow. Notice Angelou says about this exchange, we were both playing a scripted game. It is the game of prejudice, and let's put it in our notes at level 1. She says it this way. Prejudice was long born before I ever came into the situation. In other words, Angelou says, I cannot take this personal. Both the woman and I were engaged in a drama like Hamlet, the play of Shakespeare, like Hamlet, a drama that goes way, way back in time. There are roles that we play. A powerful insight, by the way, about prejudice. That so often prejudice is something that's been handed to us from earlier generations, and until we decide no, until we decide enough, until we decide to stand up and say, let's act, behave differently, that prejudice just remains. Finally, notice the power of self-talk. Do you see it? Typed in all caps on page 82. Did you see it? I would have the job. I would be a conductorette and sling a full money changer from my belt. I would. That is to say, this becomes about something more than simply having a job. Would you agree with me? This becomes about something more than having simply a job. This becomes about proving. I live in a country where I can be judged not by the color of my skin, but by the character, the content of my character, is what Martin Luther King Jr. says, and I have a dream. And here she says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try. I will try to overcome these obstacles. Let's watch now how it unfolds in the weeks to follow, right?
Were a honeycomb of determination, with apertures for the days to go in and out. The Negro organizations to whom I appealed for support bounced me back and forth like a shuttlecock on a badminton court. Why did I insist on that particular job? Openings were going begging that paid nearly twice the money. The minor officials with whom I was able to win an audience thought me mad. Possibly I was. Downtown San Francisco became alien and cold, and the streets I had loved in a personal familiarity were unknown lanes that twisted with malicious intent. Old buildings whose gray rococo facades housed my memories of the 49ers and Diamond Lil, Robert Service, Sutter, and Jack London were then imposing structures viciously joined to keep me out. My trips to the streetcar office were of the frequency of a person on salary. The struggle expanded. I was no longer in conflict only with the Market Street Railway,
Page 83.
but with the marble lobby of the building which housed its offices and elevators and their operators. During this period of strain, Mother and I began our first steps on the long path toward mutual adult admiration. She never asked for reports, and I didn't offer any details, but every morning she made breakfast